Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Grace Simpkins, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is a collaborative effort by Woods Hole Sea Grant at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where I work, NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, the Office of Education, and the National Sea Grant Program. Now, for the month of November, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, is partnering with the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum to explore all that NOAA does from air and space. You'll discover how the information that NOAA collects is part of your everyday life. Now, this series was specifically designed to help you get to know NOAA and explore our role in research and stewardship. Don't forget, after the webinar is over, to visit our website and sign up for a NOAA Live Iron-On patch to commemorate our learning together and also learn about any past and upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. I also want to extend a special thank you to our American Sign Language interpreters, Crystal Butler and Paul Williams. A few guidelines before we get started. You're all muted. However, there's a box where you can write questions, and we encourage you to do that as we go along. Write any questions that come up. We might not get to all of them, but we're going to try to answer as many as we can. And each of our speakers will answer some questions after they're done talking. Now today, I'm so excited to be introducing you to 4 of our NOAA Live All-Stars. Each of these speakers gave a full NOAA Live webinar in the past, so be sure to check out those past talks on our NOAA Live website if you're interested. We're going to be talking about how NOAA uses tools in the sky to study animals and plants on the ground and help protect them for future generations. We'll start in space, of course, with satellite tags, make our way closer to Earth with airplanes, and then we'll finally end up with drones. So stay tuned, Theodore, for when we get to the drones. Our first speaker today is Jennifer Stock with NOAA's Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary in Point Reyes, California, and she will be talking about satellite tags and seabirds. Before we start, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We recognize that Jenny is coming to us from the land of the coastal Miigwech and southern Pomo people. We are hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhedaquina. All right, I'm sure you're done with hearing me talk and you want to hear all about satellite tags. So Jenny, they are all yours.
All right, hi everybody. It's great to be here with you, and thanks for the introduction, Grace. I'm an educator with the Greater Farallones and Cordell Bank Sanctuaries just outside San Francisco, California. And I work to bring the sanctuaries and the ocean to people on land so everyone has a greater understanding of the importance of a healthy ocean ecosystem in our lives. I actually grew up on the East Coast. I grew up on Long Island, New York, and as a child got to spend a lot of time on the shores of Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean, and I went to school at the University of Delaware. But at a very young age, the saltwater bug bit me, and it's been a central part of my life and career ever since. So I'm so grateful for that in my life. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how we as scientists use satellites and satellite tags to learn about the movement of seabirds on the ocean. Next slide. Grace, are you advancing slides? Oh, perfect. So if you've been to the coast, you've likely seen a shorebird or gulls, and those are great seabirds and shorebirds to see, and they somewhat stay close to the shore. But there's also a group of seabirds, the open ocean seabirds, or we call them pelagic seabirds. And like these albatrosses on the slide here, these are birds that are very hard to follow because the ocean is their home. And the ocean is 3/4 of our Earth's planet. So they're very hard to keep track of. They wander all over. So they come to land to breed, which we can see on this slide, and that can be observed on land by scientists. But early on, scientists wondered, where do they go when they're not breeding? And so that's been a very tricky question for them to figure out. Albatrosses, like many other seabirds, face some conservation challenges out at sea. So scientists have wanted to figure out where have they been going when they go out on the open ocean. Next slide. So how do we know where they go? When we're out on boats, observers can see seabirds. And if you think about being on a boat, you have a range of view, maybe a couple miles away around the boat, and a seabird is moving. And so if you see a seabird, that's great. But for scientists, they really want to know a lot more information in terms of where seabirds are over a time scale. And so this is not the most efficient way for studying seabirds. And so scientists had to look to the sky, next slide, to satellites. And satellites have become an extremely valuable tool for studying seabirds. They're an incredible tool for studying the earth and the ocean. They give us so much information every day. And satellites can't necessarily see the seabirds themselves, but if we put tags on seabirds, then satellites become a really great tool for studying seabirds. And so that is what technology has led us to do. Next slide. So to better understand where albatrosses travel to, scientists that we worked with at Oikonos Ecosystem Knowledge, they tagged some albatrosses to try to understand where are the birds going when they are not breeding. And so to do that, we have to attract the birds to the boat and carefully handle them and attach a very small satellite transmitter tag on their feathers with tape, and then release the bird, and then the bird goes off and the tag sends a satellite transmission to the satellite. And so this has helped a ton in better understanding the movement of birds over scales of time. So next slide. So you have the satellite tag attached to the bird, and here it is flying, and sometimes they sit on the water too. They're a type of animal that's pretty much above the surface most of the time. But that tag then can send a signal to the satellite, and then the satellite sends a signal down to a receiving station on land, and then that receiving station sends the signal to our computers, and voila, we have data of where the bird is. It's not too different than carrying a cell phone around and sending a text to somebody across the world. It goes to a satellite, lands to somebody's phone on the other side of the world. So in essence, we're kind of carrying our satellite tags around as well if you have a cell phone. So this is an incredible new tool that has been around, and not just for seabirds, but other animals like whales, sharks, turtles, has become a really important tool for understanding the movement of animals on the ocean. Next slide. So this is a map that shows some of the data from some of the seabirds. So there's two islands here, Kure Atoll and Tern Island, and those are in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. And those are two breeding sites of some of these albatrosses. And each color of a line is a different animal. And so you can see they travel very far distances. And we know now through the satellite tagging that the albatrosses are going to some really interesting areas. So we have these lines, but the scientists take additional tools and will overlay these lines with sea surface temperature, wind currents, sea currents, also seafloor contours. Believe it or not, that actually tells us a lot about seabird movements, because seabirds like to go to areas where there's a lot of food. So all of that comes to play to helping us better understand the movements of birds. But they can also look at different activities that we know of where we have human interactions on the ocean, and better understand what activities seabirds might be running into on the ocean. Next slide. So by understanding these movements of animals, we can better understand the important ocean areas for these seabirds and take actions to best help these animals. Seabirds and all ocean predators and all ocean life are a big part of a giant global food web. And by understanding and taking care of different parts of our food web, we're taking better care of ourselves as well, since we are all interconnected with the ocean and the land, and having a better, healthier lives for all of us. Next slide. And I just wanted to make sure we thank our partners. We worked with the Papahana Mokuakea Marine National Monument. That's where those albatrosses breed. And research collaborators at Oikonos Ecosystem Knowledge. And together we created Winged Ambassadors, a type of education tool that's available for everybody. And I hope you'll tune in to the NOAA Live lecture that I did last year that goes into much deeper story about the story of the albatross and satellite tagging. And that's it. I think we're ready for some questions.
All right, great. I've been saving up the questions, and if you have a question for Jenny, please write it in the box. I'll still take them. But this question comes from Theodore for you. And so Theodore is wondering how he can access this information. Is the information from the satellite tag something that he can find somewhere and take a look at?
Well, let's see. So we have some of the information is in that Winged Ambassadors curriculum where there's a lot of different maps that show different movements of these birds. And I know that when we did this particular study with oikonos, the data went to a website called seaturtles.org. And there are actually several different animals that are featured on that website, not just sea turtles and albatrosses, where you can look at maps that have different transmissions of different animals and watch where they've gone. There's another program called the Tagging of Pacific Pelagics, and that's based here on the West Coast, and they have data and maps to see as well for a lot of animals. So those are really fun resources to learn about these fine scale movements of animals.
And I'll be sure to put those in the chat box as soon as we're done answering questions. I'll put in what Jenny just shared with you so that you have those resources. But great question, Theodore. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jenny. And this question comes from Alice and Paul. Can you tell from the satellite tags if the birds are flying or swimming?
It depends on the time scale of where we get data points. And from my memory with those tags, they would have it programmed to send data just a couple times a day. So if you have a couple data points in one day and they're very close together, meaning the bird hasn't traveled too far, we probably know that bird might be hanging out on the water for a little bit and maybe it's not flying. But if those data points are further away from each other, then that bird is probably on a beeline somewhere traveling. So that's actually a great question because it all depends on how much data is coming through for how it's programmed to receive information.
Fun. And if you watch, we did do a webinar on how they were tracking whales, and they were talking about how you could tell different things about their movement. So check that out too if you're interested in seeing how they're tracking what underwater sea creatures are doing as well. Next question comes from Juan, and Juan is wondering, how long will the satellite tag stay on, and do you get the tag back?
Good question. So seabirds, like all birds, molt their feathers. That means that if their feather gets tattered or used or just it's tired, eventually that feather will fall out and be replaced by a new feather, and that's the process of molting. So seabirds molt as well, and that tag will eventually fall off from molting, or it might just fall off from weather, or see, albatrosses will dip down in the water a little bit, but usually they hang on for a while, and then yes, that tag is lost to the ocean. Other tags can be retrieved if they are programmed to pop up at a certain place. Like they do that for sharks. They'll have those tags pop up at a certain place and then they go chase after the tag. But albatrosses and other seabirds, they travel very long distances. So a tag that might fall off in the middle of the ocean would be very difficult to retrieve. So that is a trade-off when we are talking about science. The greater benefit of getting all that data and information to help that animal is a much greater benefit than losing the tag to the ocean.
Excellent. Well, sadly, Jenny, we're going to have to leave satellites and move a little bit closer to Earth. So thanks so much for all of that information about the albatross, as well as information about satellite tags. And now it is my pleasure to be introducing Allison Henry. She's with NOAA Fisheries Northeast Fisheries Science Center here in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where I am. And she's going to be talking about how we use airplanes to identify and count endangered North Atlantic right whales. Now, we recognize that Allison is coming to us from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquina. And over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Grace. As Grace mentioned, I work in out of Woods Hole, Massachusetts, but I'm actually from Bethesda, Maryland. And I studied marine biology when I attended St. Mary's College of Maryland. So I have spent hours growing up at the Air and Space Museum. It's one of my favorite places to visit. So I am very pleased and excited to be a part of this. I have been in love with whales since I was about 5 years old. And I never in a million years expected that a huge chunk of my time studying them would be from an aircraft. Next slide. So when I'm not at my desk or on a boat, I am in the plane that you see at the top of the picture here. And in fact, if you look very closely at that rectangular window, that's me. I was in the bubble window that day when that photograph was taken. But these Aircrafts are the workhorse of the NOAA fleet. If you are an airplane aficionado, I highly recommend that you go to the NOAA Live webinar website, search for Twin Otter, and you'll see a virtual open house that they did with the Twin Otter, so you can see the ins and outs of this excellent plane. We like to say that the otters are low, slow, and good to go, and that's because they can fly at relatively low altitudes and low speeds. When we survey, we fly at about 1,000 feet and roughly 100 miles an hour, which is great when you're looking for marine life. And that's why these otters have been used to search for bowhead whales and walrus in the Arctic Circle, sea turtles and sea lions on the West Coast, Rice's whales in the Gulf of Mexico. And I've participated in surveys on the East Coast where we'll fly from Canada to Florida and we'll keep track of everything we see: whales, sharks, manta rays, swordfish, etc. But most of my time spent in the otter is spent looking for the North Atlantic right whale. Next slide. The North Atlantic right whale, which is pictured in the bottom right, is one of the most endangered large whale species in the world. This species was pretty much wiped out by commercial whaling, and their population grew slowly to about 500 animals. But then unfortunately, that population has been in steady decline in the last decade. The current estimate is only about 336 animals in the entire Northern Atlantic. And that is a lot of area to cover, and that's where the Twin Otter comes in handy. Now, if you'd like to know more about right whales and the surveys that we conduct, again, go to the NOAA Live website and search for right whale, and you'll find a talk I gave last year that goes into more detail. But in a nutshell, when we fly, again, at 1,000 feet and 100 miles an hour, as you can see on the left-hand side, we look for these animals, and when we see them, we circle overhead and we collect all sorts of data. We have our computers that help us keep track of the position of where they are, as well as sometimes we'll even drop acoustic microphones into the water and record the sounds that they're making, even from 1,000 feet in the air. But one of the best tools we have at our disposal is our digital cameras. Now, there are ways that you can tag whales, but tagging whales is really difficult. And until we discover a tag that we can get to stay on an animal for a long time and not harm them, we just tag them by taking a picture. Because when you take a picture of the animal's head, you could go to the next slide. Right whales have roughened skin patches on their heads, which is unique to each individual whale, much like our fingerprints or our thumbprints. So when we're circling overhead, we know where we are, we know when we're there, and if we take a picture of their head, now we know who is there. We also know maybe what it's doing and who it's with. And if you take all that sort of information for every whale that we photograph and every whale that every research team photograph, and you multiply that across all the years that we've been studying right whales, we can use that information to help protect them. Next slide. Because right whales live along the eastern seaboard of Canada and North America, unfortunately, there's a lot of overlap with human usage. And unfortunately, whales can bear the brunt of that overlap. Roughly 90% of the population has become accidentally entangled in fishing gear at some point in their lives. Many have survived, but unfortunately many more have not. And the same holds true for animals that are hit by boats. So if we know where they're going to go and when they're going to be there and what they're going to do there, we can use that information to work with fishers and with boaters to help prevent those sorts of injuries and deaths. Because unfortunately, this population is predicted to go extinct within the next 100 years. The chances are good that many of you have probably never even heard of a right whale, much less see one. And hopefully, our efforts to help protect them will enable you to see them in the future. But until then, if you find yourself in the DC area after you've gone to visit the Air and Space Museum, if you go to the next slide, please. I highly encourage that you go across the street to the Natural History Museum, where you will see a life-size model of a right whale named Phoenix, who I've actually seen in person. Thanks so much for your time, and I can look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you so much, Allison. I think you know that right whales are a favorite of mine. I brought my stuffed right whale. with its velocity on the top, just to have with me when you were doing your part. So we had a couple of questions come in. So let's see some of the questions. So Carmen asks, why can't you identify the right whales using satellites?
Well, actually, that is something that is being worked on by one of my colleagues at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and that technology is, of course, like most technology, is growing leaps and bounds, and that is something that she is working on. She and others. It's part of a larger project, but at this current stage, the best thing we can do with the satellite imagery is at least detect that there are whales present, but we don't have the resolution to be able to identify the individual whales at this point.
Gotcha. And Theodore asks, do you fly the plane or do you just do the research?
I like to just hang out in the back and collect data or be the observer, but I have flown the Twin Otter. They kind of tricked me into doing it, but it was one of the best experiences. I had a great time.
Excellent. And Robert asks, how long, because you mentioned going from the top of our coastline all the way down to Florida, how long can you be up in the plane at a time? Like how far will it go?
Well, the Twin Otters, the fleet has, I think, 4 otters, and each one is configured a little differently. So it depends on the auxiliary fuel tanks that we have. Most of our flights are about 5 to 6 hours.
And this next question comes from Isabella. I think it comes from when you were mentioning all the different things you've done. What's the most interesting thing you've seen from the airplane?
One of the highlights was we had a bowhead whale. Bowhead whales are Arctic whales, and I've seen bowheads when I did surveys off of Alaska where you're supposed to see them. But we've had this one bowhead whale come down. I've seen it with right whales off of Provincetown, which is the tip of Cape Cod. I've seen that same bowhead in with right whales in the Gulf of in the Great South Channel, which is east of Cape Cod, and we were just ridiculously excited to see that.
I would be very excited to see a bowhead here as well, I have to say. Okay, another question comes in from Aldo, and Aldo is wondering what kind of information, or if you could feed whale imagery into an AI-powered facial recognition software for whales. Does anyone do anything like that?
Yes, actually, see, now you need to get Kristen on this too, because that is something that she was inspired by you and come on Facebook and the picture says, hey, is this you? Tag yourself. And she said, well, why can't we do this for whales? So that's something that she's been working on. There's a program called Flukebook where you can submit the images and it'll go through and help you identify the whales, which is something we've done in a more manual process for years. But yes, it's something that's being worked on.
Tell me what it's called again, because I'll put that in the chat.
Flukebook, which has also been used. Flukebook, yep.
Great. All right, I've got it. And I will put those, I realized I didn't put the seabird resources, and I'll put those in the chat box as well.
And I should mention that if you want to try your hand at identifying a right whale, we have some resources for people to do that, some matching games, or you could go to the right whale catalog.
Yeah, if you want to go to the right whale catalog, you're taking your chances. We have some that start easy and sort of ease you up. So those are on the NOAA Live website. If you take a look, you'll see right whale matching game, and you can start yourself off with an easy one and work your way up to the more challenging one. All right, well, I think that that was fantastic, Allison. Thank you so much for telling us about right whales and, again, airplanes. We are not going to move any closer to Earth. We are still going to talk about a tool that's used on airplanes, but I'm going to invite Brandon to come over, and at this point, want to introduce Brandon Krumwiede from NOAA's Office of Coastal Management in Duluth, Minnesota, and he's going to be talking to us about how we use airplane imagery to manage wild rice. So really exciting. Before I turn it over to him, we recognize that Brandon is coming to us from the lands of the Anishinaabe. I'm going to say that one more time because I am trying really hard to say it right. Anishinaabe and Dakota people. And if I said that wrong, Brandon, please correct me, but over to you. Please tell us all about your tool.
Thank you, Grace. It is Anishinaabe. And yes, I'm located in Duluth, Minnesota, or also known as Anaganasing in the traditional Ojibwe language. And today I will be presenting on wild rice and the work that we do with mapping it. And the Ojibwe name or term for wild rice is Manoomin. And so a lot of people, when I say I work with wild rice, they start to think about this type of rice. And this is the kind of rice that you buy in your stores. It's the white short grain type. The rice I'm talking about is Manoomin or wild rice. And so you can see that it's actually much different from the rice that you typically buy in the store. And what's really important about this is it's a food source that grows natively here in the Great Lakes region. Next slide. But before I get into that, one of the questions I often get asked is, well, how did you even get started in mapping or using satellite imagery or aerial imagery to study wild rice? And my interest in remote sensing, or the use of satellites and aircraft to collect, measure, and observe Earth's objects, actually began when I got out of high school. I grew up on a small family farm in north central Iowa, and I did not want to be a farmer. So I joined the military, and I actually enlisted with the Army and was selected to then work at Army Space Command. And that is how I got my first foot in the door with working with remote sensing data. And since then, that was 20 years ago. If we move to the next slide, I've been using satellite imagery, aerial imagery, and even imagery collected from drones to get a better understanding of what is happening on the Earth's surface. And what's really cool is we think about an image, and we always say that an image can capture 1,000 words, right? And when you look at the science behind what makes up an image, it all has to deal with light, right? And so maybe in school you've used glass prisms like this to take sunlight and make a rainbow. And that's what's really cool about light, is that you can start to take out little pieces of it and study how it interacts with the different surfaces on Earth here, and how much of that light is reflected back. If it's reflected back and gives you a certain color like red, green, or blue, we can make up images that use just those 3 bands. And so you can think of it this way. I just mentioned the word bands, and each of those spectrum that you see in the right part of that graphic there, you can think of those as being individual bands. And so when we combine them together, they start to provide an image. And so while 3 bands like red, green, and blue provide some information, hyperspectral you can think of as an entire stack of paper or construction paper like this, right? And so with that many pieces of information, we can provide additional levels of detail about any type of species that we're studying on the Earth's surface. And so there's the visible part of light that we can see with our eyes, but there are special cameras that allow us to see things that we cannot see with our eyes. And the cameras that we use for the work with mapping wild rice or Manoomin are hyperspectral cameras, which means there's an excessive amount, or there's just that big stack of information that we can dive into. And so when we think again, a typical camera uses 3 bands, hyperspectral can use 100 or more bands to provide that level of information. Next slide. And so when we take those special cameras, we can mount them on aircrafts and fly them over the different parts of the Great Lakes. We collect a lot of information about the Earth's surface. And as you saw, that's a lot of data to handle. And so we use special programs like GIS or Geographic Information Systems to help us really work through all that data. And so while there's data coming in from the aircraft, we also collect data from in the field to help us to validate and verify exactly what we're seeing through that aircraft imagery. And so with GIS and this imagery, we can start to think about mapping out the spatial distribution, or where is wild rice on the landscape. And this allows us to have a better sense of how to conserve, protect, and also work towards restoration of wild rice across the landscape in the Great Lakes region here. And so in that image in the lower right, you can actually see those areas highlighted in lime green or bright green colors. And that is actually wild rice that's present here along this river in the upper portion of Michigan. Next slide. And so the importance of wild rice or Manoomin is quite significant. A lot of our partners in the region are tribal partners. And so it's an important sacred plant to our tribal communities located in the Great Lakes Basin. We've done exercises working with the tribal partners to figure out, what does Manoomin mean to you, or what is it to you? And so the graphic that you see in the upper left is showing those one-word answers. It's family, it's sacred, it's vital, it's an ecosystem. And there are many benefits that it provides, not only to the people in the Great Lakes region, but all the animals that depend upon it as well. It's a way of life for several folks in the region as well. And so in the lower left, you actually see how wild rice is traditionally harvested by using canoes, slowly pushing through them with a long pole, and then using knockers to gently bend the wild rice over into the canoe and tap the head of those plants to release the grains that you actually see, which are these after they've been properly harvested and parched. And as I mentioned, a lot of our tribal partners across the Great Lakes region here in the map that you see on the right depend on this as a food source for the families. Oftentimes, wild rice is one of the first foods that people eat when they are born, and it is often given as a gift during a funeral ceremony as well. So it's an important part of everybody's lives here in the Great Lakes region. Next slide. So with that, I want to say Chi-Miigwech, and thank you to all of the tribal partners that are helping us to do this great work across the Great Lakes, and also thank you for the Great Lakes Restoration Funding that allows us to continue to do this research and support our understanding of wild rice on the Great Lakes landscape. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. I know I always love hearing more about wild rice because I didn't really know anything about it, and I didn't get this question, so I'm going to actually start us off with this question because I really want to hear. I'm hoping it's in everyone else's mind, but how does it taste? Does it taste the same as other rice?
It doesn't. In fact, what's really interesting is it doesn't taste the same and it doesn't smell the same. So if I was actually to open up these jars, this jar, this is the typical rice, kind of smells starchy. But when you actually open up this jar of rice, it kind of has that earthy smell to it. So it's a lot more savory in taste and kind of more, almost a nutty flavor to it as well. And so what's really great about it, one of my favorite dishes, is actually to have it for breakfast in the morning. So you pour a little bit of maple syrup on top of it, as well as some fresh blueberries, maybe a splash of milk, a great breakfast porridge for sure.
Can you buy it somewhere? Because now I want to try it.
You can, and it's interesting because of its taste, and everybody wants to try it. It's interesting. Wild rice itself that you might find in the stores, there can actually even be cultivated wild rice, and so that will definitely look a lot more darker, almost to the point of being black because it's over parched. This has been hand parched. Somebody's actually took the time with their hands to parch this over a fire, and so it gives it a lot more of that flavor to it. But you can buy wild rice. It's typically next to the other rice in the shopping aisles. And so you'll just want to check to see, is it cultivated wild rice, which means it's grown in a rice paddy like the other rice, or is it hand parched and hand harvested? And that is usually done by a lot of our tribal partners here in the Great Lakes or Canada as well.
Excellent. Well, I see that one of my friends on the webinar is offering to bring me some wild rice. So I'm definitely going to try it. And I encourage everybody to try some and do a taste test. Okay, some other questions that came in. Thank you for satisfying my curiosity. Theodore asks, is the airplane that you're using, that you're flying around, a Cessna?
So the camera that in this case was collected by a Cessna, but the aircraft, what's nice about the hyperspectral sensors is they can be mounted inside of an aircraft, but they are getting to be small enough now that they can actually be also mounted onto a drone or an uncrewed aerial vehicle as well. And so that's the beauty of hyperspectral, is that they can be used at all those different scales that you talked about, Grace, from satellites all the way down to drones. It's just one of those unique sensors that provides us a lot more data to work with as scientists here at NOAA.
Exciting. And Sarah was wondering, can anyone go out and harvest wild rice? Because you talked about it being harvested.
You can. In some states where it grows natively, you can actually get a tag to go out and harvest wild rice. And so it is one of those things that you can kind of forage and collect on your own. So yes, that's the beauty of wild rice. It's natively growing out here, and we can harvest it and use it on your own.
And one last question. This came in from Juan, and he's wondering, you mentioned animals eating wild rice. What animals typically would eat wild rice?
So geese, ducks, they all love wild rice, as well as crayfish. They'll eat at the roots. Fish sometimes will eat it if it falls into the water, but really a lot of the waterfowl are dependent upon that wild rice. We also have muskrats that will also use it to make their homes, the fibers from the plant itself. And so that's a benefit of wild rice, is it helps all animals in that wetland community.
Sounds pretty versatile, I have to say. Well, thank you so much, Brandon. Every time I hear you talk, I learn a little bit more. Really exciting to learn about hyperspectral analysis and wild rice. So thanks so much for sharing that. At this point, it is time for us to move on to our last but not least, because very exciting, we're going to hear from Katie Sweeney. So it is my pleasure to be introducing you to Katie. She works with NOAA Fisheries, Alaska Fisheries Science Center. She's located in Seattle, Washington, and she's going to be bringing us a little bit closer to Earth. So we went from satellites, we were at airplanes, and she's going to talk to us about drones and how we use drones to study fur seals and sea lions. We want to recognize that Katie's work is done in the Aleutian Island chain, in the Aleutian Island chain and in the Pribilof Islands. And these areas are the traditional lands and waters of the Anunga, which is translated into the people of the sea. So they have stewarded their lands and waters for thousands of years. We also recognize that Katie is presenting from the traditional lands of the Coast Salish, including the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. So I'm super excited to hear what you have to share. Over to you, Katie.
Great, thank you, Grace. If you can go to the next slide. Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to speak with you today and talk about how we use drones at the Marine Mammal Lab at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. So first, I want to share a bit about how I came to be a marine biologist. As you can tell from this slide, I was definitely one of those kids that would always proclaim that I wanted to be a marine biologist. And as you can tell, I never grew out of it. I owe my passion for conservation and the environment to living in pretty wooded areas that had creeks, so I could go and see salmon coming up the stream to spawn during the fall. I also had the great privilege of being able to go to Hawaii, and I really think ever since my first experience immersing myself in a warm ocean just sealed the deal that I was going to be obsessed with the ocean. Next slide. But at that time, I certainly never expected that I would become a drone pilot. So now I want to tell you a bit about how drones have helped us conduct research. So as you can see from the map on the left, Alaska State, which is the state where I do all of my field work, is huge. It's almost the same size or same width as the United States. And all those little blue dots on the bottom southern coastline there are sites where we find stellar sea lions and northern fur seals. That distance of the southern coastline spans 2,500 miles, which is almost like if you were to take a flight from Seattle to Florida, which you can see on that dashed line. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, never mind. Sorry, I'm wrong. So the other great thing about drones, obviously, as I talked about, is they are really great to get us access to areas that are really hard to reach and really remote. Drones also offer us the opportunity to answer questions in a new way, and sometimes drones can even help us answer new scientific questions. But overall, drones can help make a lot of our fieldwork much easier. And while they're not suited for every research trip, they're a great tool to have in our toolbox. Next slide. So now I'm going to show you an example of how we use drones in my program to study stellar sea lions. So the picture on the upper right, you can see those are stellar sea lions. The small dark animals are pups, and the medium-sized animals are adult females, and that big guy in the back is an adult male. So just a fun fact, adult males get up to 11 feet long and can weigh up to 2,400 pounds. And that's about the same size as a Fiat 500 or a small car. So I wanted to be able to show you on the left, the type of images that we collect from our drones. We're able to go out to the most remote islands of the Aleutian Islands, where this endangered population of stellar sea lions is in decline. The drones give us an opportunity to collect these images, and then we collect the counts of sea lions on these images to see how the population is doing. Grace, if you could just click that animation. The other thing that we're able to see in these images is marked animals. So you can see tilde 100 there. And the benefit of marking animals is that we can observe them throughout their lifetime. And that information helps us better understand how well the population is surviving, and also how often they're having pups and if they're moving in or out of the area. Next slide. Another group in the Marine Mammal Lab with me who studies ice seals, they are hoping to use drones as a new way to answer a scientific question. So this group conducts surveys from a ship where they go out to sea ice to find ice seals. And as you can see in that picture on the left, it requires a lot of people to go out and safely catch an animal. When they catch them, they weigh them and measure them and collect all sorts of samples. They do this in order to get a better understanding of how healthy the seals are. But of course, scientists are always trying to find a better way that we can do our research with as little contact with the animals as possible, but also have access to the most animals that we can to collect as much information as possible. Another scientist, Dr. Michelle Sharrow from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, has figured out a way to use drones to do this very thing. Our marine mammal group was able to go to an aquarium, which you can see pictures of on the right side. And so they were actually able to collect measurements of these ice seals in hand and then fly the drone over them so they could compare those real measurements with the measurements from the image. Next slide. And now what I'm going to show you is a really cool video that Dr. Sharrow was kind enough to share with you all. That circle of dots shows you where each time the drone took a photo. And these images can be stitched together with fancy computer software to develop these 3D models of the environment and of the animals. So as we zoom in, we're circling there around an adult female and a pup. They kind of look like rocks. But from these models, scientists are hoping to collect measurements so they can estimate length and weight to help better understand the health of the population. And next slide. Finally, another group at the Marine Mammal Lab, they use drones off of the coast of Washington to get a better look at gray whales. So these images are helpful in several ways. Similar to right whales, as Allison shared, you can see gray whales have all sorts of different unique marks and scars. And these unique patterns help us identify this individual and recognize it year after year. Also, unfortunately, sometimes these whales get entangled in old fishing gear or other man-made plastics. So when that happens, we're able to go out, fly over the drone, and see if there is an entangled whale and if it looks safe enough to disentangle it. Eventually, this group also hopes to use these images to collect measurements like the ice seal folks are doing. And that will help them get a better idea of health of these individuals over time, and then an idea of the population as a whole, how they're doing. Next slide. So I really appreciate you all listening. It's been a pleasure to be here. I would encourage you, if you're interested in kind of getting an idea of what it's like to fly a drone for science, check out the Arctic UAV game app by Frontier Science. The link is also shared in the NOAA Live announcement webpage, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to just leave that up for one more second since it has your email and some interesting things that they can do. Just like Katie said, there is a link to that, so you can get to that from our NOAA Live page. But some really great questions came in for you, Katie. So I'm going to have you answer a few, and then I'll invite everyone back on to talk. Okay. Oh, I did the wrong thing. I got rid of myself. So the first question that I have for you comes from Theodore. Just to answer, you fly the drones yourself, right?
I do fly the drones myself, yeah. Fortunately, we fly pretty small drones, so we're able to go and get trained to fly these and kind of have them as a tool in our toolbox. Sometimes we try to use a lot bigger drones, and those have to be flown by certified pilots.
Well, and so that leads into our next question that came from Klaus Peter. Which kinds and sizes of drones are you using, and what kinds of instruments, like how much weight can they support?
That's a good question. So in general, we use a lot of rotorcrafts. So that means we use the ones with a lot of little propellers on them. We like to use drones that have at least 6 generally propellers, because if you lose one propeller, you're still going to be able to fly that drone back most likely. If you have a quadricopter or one with 4 propellers, if you lose one propeller, it's going to cause the whole drone to just fly away and crash. So that's generally what we like to do. Our drones have to be less than 55 pounds with the payload and batteries and everything, but generally the drones that we fly are only like up to 5 pounds. And usually the payload that we have on the drones that we fly is just a camera. So just a simple point and shoot camera, so not very heavy.
Interesting, really interesting. And this also comes from Klaus Peter. What weather or wind or environmental conditions do you need in order to fly the drones?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, being in Alaska, you think Alaska in the summertime might be nice weather, but it's actually can be pretty terrible weather. One thing that we always have a challenge with is fog. That's always an issue. And then of course, there's always high winds. So we aren't able to fly in winds that are higher than 25 miles per hour. But as long as it's less than that, we can fly. The drones are pretty stable, even in those high winds. And we have to make sure it's not raining. And of course, that we have enough sky that we can see, so there's no fog or clouds obstructing our view.
Exciting. I have to say, having gone to grad school in Alaska, I know what you're talking about with the changing weather. Last question that came in from Sarah, and she was just wondering how long the batteries last, like how long you can be flying the drones before you have to bring them back and presumably recharge them.
Yeah, that's a good question too. So generally, it depends on the drone. We have a lot of really small drones that can actually they can fly up to maybe 20 minutes. We always have to keep some reserve energy in the battery just in case, so that in case something comes up and it's harder to get back than we think, we want to have that buffer to keep us safe. But generally, the drone that we fly, you can fly up to 30 minutes if we have really great weather and no high winds. So as the winds increase, the power that the drones require gets higher and higher. So it depends on a lot of different factors.
Great, so fascinating. And I lied, I have one more question. This came in from Sophie. How are the animals impacted by the flights? So do you ever see not only like whether the animals are going back in the water, but do you have any tag information to see if there are any physiological impacts?
So we don't have any tagged information to better understand physiological impacts of sea lions or northern fur seals, the animals that I fly over. But we have done some disturbance studies to kind of assess at what threshold will sea lions start to be bothered by the drone, or fur seals. What we notice with fur seal rookeries in the summer are insane. They're just full of screaming fur seals, lots of movement, lots of activity. They're always kind of nipping at each other. So when we fly over fur seals at about 100 feet, they really don't care. I don't even think they notice it. It's just so loud on the rookeries. Stellar sea lions, it depends where we are, but we go to some really remote places, so they can actually be quite skittish. But fortunately, we fly at about 150 to 200 feet, and generally we don't see any reaction. Occasionally they might put their head up, but I think we've only had one instance since flying since 2014 where animals actually went in the water.
Nice, excellent. All right, well, we could keep asking questions forever, but at this point I'm going to encourage all of our all-stars to come back on, please. And there's one question that I want to just give everyone a chance to answer really quickly to give us your point of view. It's a favorite of mine that usually comes in from one of our viewers. So I just want you to really quickly, and I'll call on you each at a time, Brady Bunch style, but what's your favorite part of your job? And Katie, I'll give you a break because you were just talking. Next person I have is Allison. So Allison, favorite part of your job?
field work, being out in the fields and seeing them live and healthy, and when we get notifications of new calves.
That is super exciting. I have to say, if you, I follow Allison on Facebook, so when there's a calf, there's a lot of celebration in our house too. Jenny, how about you? Favorite part of your job?
I'd say as an educator, I am a lifelong learner, and I love constantly learning about what's happening in the ocean and the science that we're doing out in the sanctuaries. And definitely when I have the opportunity to do field work and be alongside our science teams, that is always the most fun to do.
Excellent. As an educator, I totally agree with you. Brandon, you, favorite part of your job?
Sure, it's got to be working with the partners. When we start to get the new data coming in and sharing that with them, and they, they're like, whoa, new insights and new information. Really appreciative of the work we do here at NOAA. So I think that's probably my favorite piece.
Excellent. And Katie, how about you?
Yeah, I have to agree with Allison. My favorite part is doing field work. I just like to get out there and observe the animals, and it doesn't always smell great because sea lions are super stinky, but it's a lot of fun.
Great. We had a few other questions, and I know, so if people have to jump off the webinar, please, I'm going to actually say this in case people do, but then I'm going to continue to do a few questions. So before we continue on with questions, if you do have to jump off the webinar, I just want to encourage you, we have a webinar coming up tomorrow. It's going to be awesome, and it's all about weather forecasting. We have some people from the Weather Service. We also have 2 satellite folks that are going to be talking all about satellites and how we use them in weather forecasting. So really exciting. That's at 11 o'clock tomorrow. But again, you can register for that same way through the NOAA Live website or through the Air and Space Museum. So however you get to us, I encourage you to join us tomorrow. Nicole will be moderating. It's going to be a great talk. But I want to ask a few more questions because we had some come in. So this question came, let's see, this is from, what was the question? It was one that I promised I would ask. Oh, from Aldo, and this is, I think, to Brandon. How do you put the map images, so how do you put your images from the plane then onto a map, I think was when you were showing that picture that you had.
Yeah, so that's part of the work, is actually taking the images, and we call that geo-rectifying or geo-referencing those images. So then we put them into a known geographic coordinate system. And that's how we get all the different data layers to line up on top of one another. And that's, again, some of that special software that we use through GIS to do that.
Really fun. And this question comes, I think this one is for Katie. Do you only mark females?
When we do the marking of animals, we actually mark males and females. We'll just try to go out, and they'll usually be kind of a group of pups, and we will pull pups kind of at random, and we want to make sure we try to be as random as possible. And yeah, and for fur seals, we mark them as well. We actually mark them with flipper tags because they actually stay on fur seals.
All right, any last questions? This is your chance to ask our all-stars before I liberate them. So we'll see if there are any last questions come in before we say goodbye for the day, but I think that might be it. We are at time. So I just want to thank you. I want to thank our American Sign Language interpreters. Thank you, Paul and Crystal. Thank you, Katie, Allison, Jennifer, and Brandon. Always amazing to hear from you. Again, I encourage you, if you were really interested in what one of them had to say but wanted to hear more, please watch their full talks, because they go into even more detail, really fascinating. Or if any of the topics were of interest, you might even be able to find other webinars. We have a really nice search engine on our website. You can just type in a keyword and look for whatever you're interested in, whether it is wild rice, whether it is marine mammals, whether it's seabirds. So thanks so much for tuning in and being here with us today. Really loved seeing you all, and have a great weekend. Don't forget, tomorrow at 11, learn all about NOAA and how we use satellites in weather forecasting. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day or night if you're on my coast.